Donc, bienvenue tout le monde. Mon nom est Karine Gentelet, je suis professeure de sciences sociales à l'Université du Québec en Outaouais. Comment ça va fonctionner pour ce panel-là? En fait, on a deux présentateurs qui sont en présence. La professeure Marie-Pascale Pomey et Thierry Lindor, qui ne devraient pas tarder à se joindre à nous. Et nous avons une conférence enregistrée d'un chercheur qui est à Delhi. Et nous avons aussi une invitée de Namibie qui, elle, a enregistré sa présentation, mais qui sera en direct pour la période de questions. Donc, ça devrait être très intéressant. Donc, je vais donner la parole à ces 4 personnes et après ça, nous ouvrirons sur une période de questions, sachant que j'ai aussi des questions à leur poser. Donc, l'idée pour moi dans ce panel-là, c'est que ce soit une conversation, que ce soit assez interactif. Donc, n'hésitez pas à poser des questions, à venir au micro. Alors, pour notre premier conférencier, nous allons commencer donc par une expertise sur l'Inde. Et je veux juste aussi vous dire, donc Alison et moi, c'était important qu'on parle de la gouvernance de l'IA ou de la gouvernementalité de l'IA d'une autre manière et qu'on donne, je pense que ce matin on en a parlé dans le panel, d'avoir une approche qui est top-down, justement de ne pas avoir une approche qui est top-down, mais une approche de bottom-up, et donc de donner la parole à des initiatives citoyennes, à des citoyens qui soit utilisent l'IA, la mobilisent. Comment est-ce que dans ces initiatives-là, ils ont fait des choix et comment est-ce qu'ils gouvernent leurs outils et quelles sont leurs réflexions par rapport à la participation des personnes concernées et par rapport à l'éthique et la gouvernance. Donc, vous voyez, je suis fermée à l'éthique, mais quand même ouverte à la discussion étant chercheur. Donc, voilà. Alors, notre premier conférencier donc, vient d'Inde. C'est Aaditeshwar Seth. Adit est professeur associé au département d'informatique de ITT à Delhi, où il dirige un groupe de recherche qui est Appropriate Computing Technology for Development. Il dirige également une entreprise sociale, Gram Vani, que vous pouvez trouver d'ailleurs sur le net. D'ailleurs, Gram Vani a aussi un compte Twitter, certainement que Adi va en parler. Et donc, Gram Vani construit des systèmes vocaux pour les médias communautaires dans les zones rurales. Adi s'intéresse à l'utilisation éthique des technologies de l'information et de la communication et des médias, à l'étude de l'économie politique des politiques en matière de TIC en Inde et à l'élaboration d'informations utiles pour la planification du développement socio-économique grâce à l'utilisation des sources de données massives. Donc voilà, on peut peut-être démarrer la présentation d'Adi. Elle dure à peu près une vingtaine de minutes.
Hi everyone. I'm really sorry I'm not there in person with you, but hopefully this is the next best. So what I want to talk about is that I believe that all technologists want some good to come out of our labor. And since computing is what we know, we end up thinking, how can we computationalize everything to bring about some good? I'm going to talk about why this is not easy at all. We know that technologies often lead to disempowerment. This has been known for a long time, even before any modern forms of digital technologies. When technology is imposed top-down and the users are not granted agency to understand or manage it, or get redressal when exceptions arise, an example being digital ID systems or AI failures. Or when limits to datafication are not acknowledged, an example being Facebook itself with its algorithmic methods to codify community standards. Or when technology is used explicitly for exploitation or control, as with Uber. The way to address these issues is well known. For example, the design needs to be bottom-up and framed by the people, rather than imposed from outside. Methods such as participatory design are good at involving users in the design process, and the Scandinavian origins of this methodology even paid attention to normative values such as democracy and empowerment of the weak, and even built methods to build the capacity of the users to contribute to the design process. But this is just the start. It is still centered on external experts who enter communities and try to do something. Paulo Freire went further and said that we need to engage with the weak and oppressed in their struggle, and not out of any generosity but trust and respect for them. And only then can everybody arrive at a common understanding and build strategies to overcome the oppressors. Marx is credited with laying the seeds for the worker inquiry process, which is a way of inquiry to have the exploited classes understand their state and overcome the false consciousness so that they can engage in a struggle. And finally, Gramsci gets to the heart, where he talks of learning and education as being critical to create organic intellectuals from amongst the community itself, so that the community demands and even develops maybe the technology that is relevant for them, rather than wait for outsiders to come and figure out what to build for them. We have a long way to go to get to such a stage where people can tell what technology to build in the first place and for what purpose. The place where a lot of progress has been made is on the development of the technology artifact itself, to build more and more safeguards and to ensure that it works without errors. Debating about persuasive user interfaces and handling data privacy, biases in the data, and encoding fairness definitions are some such areas. I'll talk about two other aspects where more attention is needed. Any technology shapes power relationships between different stakeholders, and I'll talk about that soon. Many harms from technology also arise at the socio-technical interface when it is deployed and used. This requires careful management and governance simply because the world is complex and not all eventualities can be anticipated and encoded into the technology. I'll explain through some examples from my work with Gramvani about this. Gramvani has been working on providing what are called community media services to provide tools to communities through which they can create and share their own media. This, as you can imagine, can have many impacts. People can call and listen to audio messages and record their own messages, which can be played back to other users to create discussions, question answering, and other use cases, like consulting experts, conveying grievances to government officials, and so on. We took a lot of care to design it well. For example, we narrowed down on the use of voice so that it could be inclusive, and we built it in a federated manner with local networks so that it could cater to locally relevant use cases. But despite all this careful design, we had to still pay close attention to managing surprises that arose at the socio-technical interface to ensure that these tools did not amplify existing social inequities. Since many of our users were first-time users of any automated system, the volunteers trained them through offline workshops on how to use the tools and understand their relevance. But very soon we saw that the more skilled users were able to appropriate it for what they wanted to do with it, and in fact deliberately tried to exclude many people who, for example, were not very comfortable with recording messages and which directly related to underlying caste and class and gender issues. We had to closely observe what was going on with the platform, and we had to work hard and deliberately to recruit volunteers from across different class and caste categories to make the platform more representative. It was even harder to bring women onto the platform, just because reaching women to tell them about the platform was difficult in itself. The main point I want to make is that we had to build feedback processes to understand the platform usage and undertake very deliberate effort to ensure that we were to some extent able to overcome existing inequities. Of course, there is a big cost question here. Keeping equity in mind increases the cost and raises the question about who foots this bill, and I will come to this later. My book, which was published recently, talks about many such issues to highlight the need to closely observe where the technology may be going wrong and to then fix these problems. Public spheres of the sort that Habermas talks about for people to be able to understand one another are where technologists and users can interact and can help technologists to understand the user's viewpoint. Such continuous listening can build feedback loops and accountability structures to manage the outcomes in a better way. There is, of course, the additional benefit that can be gained if the users are able to participate in the management process itself, as E.F. Shoemaker and Eva Nilek have said. Shoemaker with this notion of appropriate technology that should be manageable by the people, and Illick with this notion of tools of conviviality that can build the capacity of communities to govern technology, can give very useful directions. As an example, we've been continuously pushing for more and more decentralized governance of content moderation. Moderation has typically happened centrally, where we have had a share of cases of misuse, and we have adhered to normative principles of plurality by ensuring that diverse viewpoints get equal exposure. But at the same time, our federated structure with many local instances, each deciding their own content programming, has meant that the moderation team also misses out on local nuances sometimes. Therefore, we have built a working method where the moderation team continuously consults the volunteers on any questionable content contributions or which one should be considered more important than others. A new distributed moderation setup that we are building will make this more easy. The point I therefore want to make is that conscious choices have to be made during the management process of whether to strengthen community institutions or to follow some other method. After discussing complexities that arise at the socio-technical interface, the next part I want to touch upon is the power relationships that technology changes. It empowers some and disempowers others. Here is a very simplified view of the use of the Aadhaar digital ID infrastructure for access of welfare benefits in India. Users have faced many issues with the use of Aadhaar, such as network connectivity issues, biometric errors, spelling mistakes in their names, etc. And the first requirement is for them to be aware of methods to resolve these issues. It is also possible that the problem may not be at the user end but on the Aadhaar system itself, and whether or not that is addressed has remained unclear and hard to diagnose. Next, once the authentication does succeed, whether further discretionary restrictions will be imposed or not based on other eligibility criteria is always possible. At Gramvani, being able to train volunteers from the same local communities on Aadhaar and its issues has been very helpful. Many people are able to resolve their issues by recording them on our platform and through it to get connected with volunteers from their area. This has helped solve the problem of a lack of know-how among the people to some extent. Further, talking about issues related to Aadhaar failures or misuse of discretionary power on the local platform instance helps keep a check on these problems. This is really the kind of work you would expect media to do in a democracy, to keep a check on power holders. And the platform itself becomes more and more important to be paid attention based on how many people use it. My point, therefore, is that when conceiving of technology, it should be important to think about how it will alter the power relationships between different stakeholders and whether it will make them more uniform or whether it will increase the power differentials between people. So far, I have talked about digital technology in general. Is AI any different, or can the same principles be used to build and use AI in more responsible ways? I think there is no major technical difference, but a mindset difference. The kind of work I've described so far is from an infrastructuring approach. I started as a computer networks researcher, and probably that's where it comes from, of building tools that can be used by people. I'm relating it with B.R. Ambedkar, who fought against the caste system in India and promulgated higher education as a tool that could enable the lower caste to move forward. The AI approach, I feel, is not so much about providing tools to people, but about building tools that can do tasks better than people. It's more like a socialist top-down mindset to have systems figure out what's the best thing to do. Best in whatever way, efficiency, fairness, and so on, where the objectives are defined by people in some manner. This approach too will, however, need all the rest of the checks and balances of active management of the technology and to think through the power relationships that the technology will shape. It is important to note, however, that the AI-based approach needs to have the right data to be informatized before any objectives can be evaluated that use the data. But what data is informatized depends on what value is attached to the data. I'll give an example from some recent work we have started in the area of natural resource management. Many parts of India are highly water stressed, and farmers are able to grow only a single crop in a year during the monsoons. Rich farmers are able to dig bore wells, which worsens the situation for small farmers whose open wells also dry up due to depleting groundwater levels. Solutions such as rainwater harvesting and tree planting do exist, and geospatial methods can be built to recommend which areas are suitable for what kind of natural resource management treatment. But an AI-based solution to keep equity in mind will need an extensive social mapping to have been done to understand whether it is rich or is it poor farmers who will benefit from some NRM treatment in a particular area. The problem is that somebody needs to build this data before it can be used in any objective function. The question then is who pays to collect this data? Who verifies that the data is of good quality? If equity doesn't have any price attached to it, then it is unlikely that we'll find anybody willing to pay to generate good quality data that can help achieve equity through an AI-based approach. Recall that even with the earlier Gramvani example, we had the same question. Who will pay for equity guarantees, given that it typically costs more? The only solution is for society in general to agree upon the importance of equity. And actually, none of this is new. This is what all the people I've talked about have also been saying. It's just that computing has never seen its goal as respecting equity. It just got swept away somewhere in the corner, while all of us got busy and excited with creating machines that did wondrous things. But the bigger point is that this is a core ethical value that not just technologists but society needs to embrace to remove unfreedoms and structures of injustice. And Marx says that this is also the basis of humanism. We want to do good through our labor. Production and consumption build social relationships, and positive relationships only arise when the process is not coercive, it does not use others as a means, and ultimately generates genuine use value. Not doing this leads to alienation. Even if technologists realize this, it is not something that they alone can achieve. Unless society does not mandate that the goal of technology should be to bring equity, it won't come about. To summarize, not only do we need better methods to transform from outsiders to insiders, to understand what technologies to build, to learn how to listen to manage technologies better, and to see the goal of technology as removing entrenched inequalities by understanding the social relationships that technology creates. But the point is that following these methods requires a societal level commitment as well to equity and power-based equality. And to build the societal level commitment, we need to build meta-social good systems, methods and systems that can help strengthen democracy and build a consensus on what is the purpose of our work, the relevance of equity, and of removing unjust structures in society. Once these core values are identified and agreed upon, we need to create a space for many pluralistic groups to flourish, but with some core values common to all of them. And maybe this may also require a change in the current economic system. How can that be made possible, and what role can we play? I'll stop here. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much. I wish Adi could have been there. I'm just switching to English because I realized that we have one of our guests, Kristophina. She's online listening to us, and she was online this morning, so I want to acknowledge the fact that she's here. Hi, Kristophina. For your information, I won't take any questions. We will wait after all the presenters have done their speeches, okay? Donc, sorry for the interpreters. I'm going to be really Canadian today, so I'm switching in French now. Donc, on va maintenant, je vais vous présenter la prochaine conférencière. Marie-Pascale, peut-être tu peux venir te préparer. Donc, Marie-Pascale Pomey est professeure titulaire à l'École de santé publique de l'Université de Montréal. Elle est chercheure régulière au CRHCHUM, titulaire de la chaire en évaluation des technologies et des pratiques de pointe, médecin à l'IENSSS et co-directrice du CEPPP. J'imagine que tu vas nous expliquer tout ça, hein? Elle dirige un programme de recherche sur la co-création d'innovations, en particulier en santé du numérique avec les patients et les usagers. Donc, vous voyez, on continue, après qu'Adi nous ait parlé de code design, avec les personnes qui sont impliquées. Marie-Pascale va juste nous transporter au Québec et en santé cette fois-ci. Donc voilà, 15 minutes.
Eh bien, je suis ravie d'être avec vous. Merci encore pour cette belle invitation. Ça faisait quelques mois qu'on y pensait, puis c'est enfin le grand jour. Donc, on est ravis d'être parmi vous. Parce que je dis on, parce que je le fais vraiment au nom de mes deux autres collègues, donc Esli Osmaniou et aussi Sylvain Bédard, qui ont été mes deux grands collègues avec qui nous avons réalisé tout ce travail-là. Donc, je vais passer rapidement sur la reconnaissance du territoire. Le contexte de recherche, eh bien, nous avions évidemment été très interpellés sur le problème des applications mobiles qui justement utilisent de l'intelligence artificielle et la capacité de la population à adhérer à cette mesure dans le cadre donc de la pandémie de Covid-19. Et on avait envie de mieux comprendre finalement quelles étaient les tensions qui existaient entre les droits individuels et aussi les droits collectifs et finalement quelle était la perception de la population par rapport à ça. Donc, on a proposé un projet dans le cadre donc, de l'Obvia qui a été financé. Et donc, notre idée était, évidemment, d'enrichir le débat public sur la recherche collaborative, parce qu'on pense que c'est absolument essentiel dans le domaine de la santé publique, d'étudier aussi les perceptions des citoyens et des patients à l'égard des technologies de traçage et de notification d'exposition. Donc, finalement, d'avoir aussi une perception de la manière dont on peut utiliser l'intelligence artificielle à des fins de protection de la population, et aussi faciliter la collaboration entre les différentes parties prenantes, que ce soit les décideurs, les développeurs évidemment de technologies et la population. Donc pour qu'on soit plus à même de répondre à la préoccupation de la population d'une façon plus générale. On voulait évidemment regarder aussi quelle était l'utilité et les défis de la santé numérique en contexte de pandémique, vue par les yeux des patients et aussi des citoyens. Et pour ça, bien, on voulait vraiment développer un sondage qui permettrait d'aller chercher cette perception. Mais on n'allait pas le faire tout seul dans notre coin, on allait vraiment le co-développer. Et c'est ça que je vais vous présenter, ainsi que les résultats. Et finalement, pour nous amener à des réflexions sur cette acceptabilité sociale et finalement aider les décideurs à être un peu mieux à l'écoute de la population pour être capable de faire en sorte qu'elle adhère aux mesures qui sont prises. Donc, on a utilisé un petit schéma que j'utilise plus globalement dans mes travaux lorsque j'implique des citoyens ou des patients. Donc, on a regardé d'abord, évidemment, l'identification des besoins. C'était assez évident dans le contexte de la Covid-19. Ensuite, on a vraiment développé un système de consultation envers les patients et les usagers. Et puis, ensuite, évidemment, on est arrivé avec des recommandations et beaucoup de publications. Donc l'identification des besoins, ça a été reconnu évidemment par l'OBIA et le FRQS comme étant une bonne idée d'aller regarder ce que pensaient les citoyens et les patients dans le domaine. Et nous avions une équipe assez chevronnée, de 3 chercheurs principaux. Vous avez vu qu'un des co-chercheurs était lui-même patient, donc dès le départ on annonçait les couleurs. Et ensuite on avait 7 co-chercheurs, 6 collaborateurs et 2 assistants de recherche. Alors, on a débuté notre travail en faisant quand même une revue de la littérature, parce qu'on s'est dit, mais qu'est-ce qui est sorti dans le domaine justement de ces fameuses applications de traçage? Et si on les regarde à la loupe d'un certain nombre donc, de cas théoriques, comme d'ailleurs celui qui ont été présentés par le précédent présentateur, là, on va voir si effectivement ça retient quand même certaines bonnes pratiques, en tous les cas, dans le domaine. Et donc, on a été un petit peu déçus là, sur ce qu'on est allé chercher dans la littérature. D'abord, il y avait très très peu d'articles qui décrivaient l'impact de ces applications sur vraiment l'environnement, l'organisation, le côté organisationnel et économique. Et finalement, ne remplissait pas du tout la grille qui était proposée par Pascal Lehoux en termes d'innovation responsable en santé. La deuxième chose aussi, il y avait très peu d'articles qui faisaient référence à une évaluation continue de l'application de ces applications dans le cadre de la capacité des acteurs à les utiliser. Peu de réflexion aussi sur l'implantation ou l'impact global sur l'organisation des soins de santé. Donc, OK, on l'utilise, mais c'est quoi à quoi ça sert finalement? Est-ce que ça va vraiment être utile? Et finalement... l'engagement de la population ou des usagers dans la construction même de ces outils de traçage, finalement, a été assez rudimentaire. Et on a trouvé que 2 articles qui mentionnaient un petit peu de consultation, mais il n'y avait pas du tout de collaboration ou de partenariat. Donc on était arrivé à un premier niveau de recommandation à partir donc de la littérature, en disant que, il fallait évidemment beaucoup plus informer les utilisateurs des mesures prises en lien avec la protection de la vie privée, qu'il était aussi important d'évaluer continuellement finalement l'utilisation de ces technologies et de voir un peu l'impact que ça pouvait avoir sur les personnes concernées. De changer aussi la terminologie, ça c'est intéressant parce que ça a été repris par la suite. Donc maintenant on ne parlait plus d'application de traçage mais de notification d'exposition. Et finalement, évidemment, d'avoir des systèmes qui nous permettraient d'aller chercher le point de vue des citoyens et des patients de façon beaucoup plus significative que uniquement de consultation, avec aussi une étude des facteurs qui faciliterait ou pas l'efficacité de ces applications. Donc, on a décidé de faire un sondage auprès de la population parce que le bilan, comme vous le savez tous, a été quand même assez négatif, c'est-à-dire que l'alerte Covid qui a été donc proposée au niveau du fédéral a été très peu utilisée par la population, et puis Covid qui avait été développé par le MILA est mort de sa belle mort avant même d'être commercialisé. Donc, on voulait un peu mieux comprendre ce qui s'était passé. Donc on a créé un comité de patients citoyens et on a fait en sorte qu'ils puissent vraiment nous aider à construire ce sondage. Donc on a fait un appel assez large. On a eu l'INM, l'Institut du Nouveau Monde, qui nous a soutenus dans nos démarches, ainsi que l'INES, donc l'Institut national d'excellence en santé et services sociaux. Et nous avons eu donc un certain nombre de personnes qui ont répondu à notre appel. Et finalement, il y a eu 12 personnes qui ont constitué ce comité. Et comme vous le voyez aussi, on recherchait quand même une certaine forme de diversité, que ce soit évidemment en termes de handicap, puisqu'on voulait aller chercher des personnes qui étaient plus particulièrement touchées par la Covid-19, en termes aussi de sensibilité personnelle ou de problèmes de santé, des minorités visibles, aussi des personnes en lien avec les communautés autochtones. Donc on a réalisé notre mandat à travers 4 phases. La première, évidemment, c'était de revenir sur les objectifs de recherche et comment on serait capable de pouvoir y répondre, de sélectionner des thèmes qui seraient vraiment les plus importants pour les patients et pour la population, de créer le questionnaire et finalement d'arriver avec une analyse critique des résultats. Donc le comité a été... nous, on a fait évidemment, à partir de notre vue de la littérature, on avait des questions qui émergeaient de façon assez évidente. Et on a donc, en lien avec ce que nous a proposé notre comité consultatif, été chercher aussi un retour auprès de groupes marginaux, marginalisés en tout cas, qui ne sont pas souvent consultés, donc en particulier les migrants, des personnes qui sont dans des grandes situations de pauvreté, parce qu'eux, évidemment, ils n'ont pas les technologies, puis quand même, on parle du fait qu'il faut les utiliser. Donc, on voulait aussi comprendre les enjeux qu'ils pouvaient vivre. Et finalement, donc, on est arrivé à extraire un certain nombre de thèmes. Donc ça, je trouve qu'on a été assez, comment on pourrait dire, innovant, même dans la méthodologie, parce que vous pouvez imaginer qu'on était tous à distance là, et donc on a utilisé Zoom et on a utilisé le fait de faire des sessions assez rapides pour donc faire en sorte que par petits sous-groupes le comité pouvait réfléchir et on les amenait vraiment à nous sortir plein d'idées et ensuite on les organisait. Et ça a été assez remarquable en termes de production. Là, vraiment, en 10 minutes, on est capable d'extraire un jus absolument incroyable. Donc, quand on nous dit que c'est compliqué, là, comment ça s'appelle, la consultation publique, je ne suis pas d'accord. Et ça coûte pas cher non plus, parce que Zoom, quand même, c'est pas le truc le plus onéreux quand même. Et en l'espace de 30 minutes, on a quand même généré 84 questions excessivement pertinentes. Et finalement, après, on a travaillé ensemble pour réduire le nombre de questions, pour arriver finalement à 36 questions qui couvraient à la fois l'accessibilité donc à un téléphone, savoir évidemment est-ce que les gens ont ou pas un outil qui permet de faire ce traçage, non pas seulement manuellement, mais là cette fois-ci avec une technologie, l'expérience vécue pendant la pandémie et l'application alerte Covid, est-ce que les gens l'ont utilisé ou pas, les intentions aussi, pour quelles raisons, est-ce qu'ils étaient intéressés ou au contraire ils n'étaient pas intéressés, et puis leur motivation, les craintes, les barrières aussi qu'ils pouvaient mettre en évidence. Et finalement, mieux comprendre quelles auraient été les conditions d'acceptabilité pour une meilleure utilisation d'un outil comme celui-là si on était reconfronté à une pandémie. Donc ensuite, on a fait le sondage, on a utilisé une firme de sondage qui s'appelle Somme, qui fait ça donc à distance. Et ensuite, on a travaillé encore avec notre comité pour vraiment analyser les données, extraire des suggestions et finalement aussi des recommandations. Donc, on a aussi beaucoup diffusé nos connaissances et je veux vraiment féliciter le groupe là, avec lequel j'ai travaillé parce qu'on a été très, très productifs. Et on a aussi eu une très belle collaboration de l'INM qui a même réalisé un balado permettant aussi une diffusion plus large. Donc, on a vraiment beaucoup publié ce que l'on a fait. Alors, je vais vous revenir un peu sur le bilan. Finalement, pour les pouvoirs publics, si j'avais su, qu'est-ce que j'aurais pu faire de mieux, en tous les cas, pour faire en sorte que ça marche. Donc, c'est vraiment le petit sondage après la rencontre. Bon, ça, c'est aussi le bilan de... Comment ça s'appelle ? Ah, mais c'est pas la bonne... je vais revenir après, là. Mais là, on a aussi fait une évaluation de l'expérience des membres de notre groupe pour savoir s'ils avaient apprécié ce genre de choses. Et ils ont évidemment adoré. Ils ont particulièrement apprécié qu'on aille les consulter et qu'on les intègre dans tout le processus. Et franchement, ils ont amené des points de vigilance auxquels on n'aurait pas forcément pensé. Donc, comme je vous disais, là, ça permet vraiment de démocratiser, là aussi, la recherche participative en santé numérique avec des méthodologies très accessibles et pas complexes à utiliser. Et la valeur ajoutée du comité de co-création, ça a vraiment été l'intégration vraiment complète de la voix des patients et des citoyens depuis le début des projets de technologie, de mieux prendre en compte le point de vue des populations vulnérables, ça a été aussi un point très important, et puis il faut aller vers eux, c'est pas eux qui vont venir vers nous, sélectionner les éléments les plus importants qui reflètent les problèmes soulevés par les patients et les citoyens, et finalement de réorienter les objectifs du projet afin de mieux prendre en considération les besoins réels, donc comme on peut et puis finalement c'est une méthode aussi qu'on peut généraliser plus largement quand on travaille sur des technologies en lien avec l'intelligence artificielle, et avec des problématiques quand même relativement assez délicates. Et finalement aussi, on peut le faire de façon assez régulière, en plus en s'aidant d'organisations comme Somme qui font ça relativement bien et vite. Donc là, je me rends compte qu'il y a eu un petit problème dans le... Je vais vous présenter les résultats du sondage parce que c'est vraiment intéressant ce qui est ressorti. On a eu la chance aussi d'aller chercher non seulement le point de vue des adultes, mais aussi le point de vue des adolescents. Puis ça, c'est aussi assez original parce qu'il y a eu très peu d'études qui ont porté sur cette tranche d'âge, qui pourtant est quand même pas mal techno. Et vous allez voir que, évidemment, on n'a pas tout à fait les mêmes résultats. Donc là aussi, ça amène les pouvoirs publics à réfléchir sur des stratégies qui sont différentes en fonction des populations auxquelles on s'adresse. Donc là, vous voyez que l'accès à la technologie, ben là, les ados, ils sont à 98% avec des téléphones. Donc 82% des adultes et des ados utilisent fréquemment des applications qui collectent des données personnelles. Donc on pouvait dire qu'en tous les cas, dans le cadre de notre projet, il n'y avait pas de barrière à première vue sur l'utilisation de données personnelles. Mais pourtant, dans le cadre de la Covid, il y avait des soupçons. Donc, et puis l'utilisation de l'alerte Covid, vous voyez que les ados s'en étaient quand même pas mal désintéressés et les adultes un petit peu moins, mais on était quand même qu'à 43% sur notre échantillon. Qu'est-ce qui motivait le plus les gens à utiliser cette alerte Covid ? Bien évidemment, les recommandations gouvernementales, que ce soit au niveau provincial ou au niveau fédéral. Et aussi, du côté des ados, ça on pouvait évidemment s'en douter, c'est vraiment tout le réseau social. Donc, c'est vraiment de beaucoup travailler sur les réseaux d'influence. Et aussi le gouvernement du Québec. Et puis, ce qui motiverait les non-utilisateurs à télécharger l'application, eh bien, c'est vraiment d'avoir plus d'informations sur la preuve de l'efficacité de l'application, donc vraiment de montrer que ça peut être utile et puis qu'ils peuvent en tirer aussi un bénéfice réel pour eux. Donc là, nos applications qu'on a utilisées au Canada étaient très, très, très centrées, puis il n'y avait pas beaucoup d'informations autres qui auraient pu être aussi valorisantes. On aurait eu envie d'aller sur l'application, là, quand c'est juste uniquement pour se dénoncer, comme quand on a été en contact avec quelqu'un. C'est pas forcément une grande envie pour les gens de faire ce genre de choses, alors que s'il y avait eu des informations sur l'état de la pandémie, des recommandations, des liens avec des personnes avec qui ils auraient pu avoir de l'information scientifique plus intéressante, etc., et puis qu'il y ait un peu plus de vie et de passage sur l'application, ça aurait évidemment aussi changé les choses. Et auprès des adolescents, ben c'est pareil, là c'est vraiment tous les contacts sociaux qu'ils auraient pu faire, les informations qu'ils auraient pu échanger entre eux, qui auraient pu les aider à être un petit peu plus proactifs dans l'utilisation. 53% des adultes avaient des inquiétudes par rapport à l'application et 22% les ados. Donc vous voyez aussi là ce rapport à des données personnelles est vraiment différente avec des effets générationnels. La perte de la vie privée, donc les adultes et les ados l'ont vraiment signifié. La cybersécurité est revenue un petit peu plus chez les adultes que chez les ados. La confidentialité des données, c'est vraiment quelque chose qui a touché les deux populations. Et finalement, il y avait aussi la géolocalisation et l'utilisation du GPS qui était une donnée qui a retenu aussi l'attention de ces deux populations. Finalement, donc, la recommandation des utilisateurs pour améliorer l'application, ben c'est ça, c'était d'ajouter des statistiques, comme je vous dis, là, qui est quand même de l'information un peu plus intéressante que uniquement le fait de entre guillemets, se dénoncer. Et ajout aussi automatique des tests Covid. Donc, il n'y avait pas de lien non plus entre ce qui se passait par ailleurs dans le récolte d'informations sur la Covid-19 et l'application. Or, c'est sûr que la population s'attend à ce qu'on ait des systèmes qui communiquent un peu mieux que ça. Hein. Et finalement aussi de l'intégrer dans le passeport vaccinal, ça aurait été excessivement intéressant. 66% des adultes et 61% des ados croient que les citoyens doivent être impliqués dans le développement de l'application, donc ils auraient aimé être beaucoup plus présents. Puis par exemple au MILA, hein, on a essayé de travailler un petit peu avec eux là, avant que finalement il y ait une décision politique soit faite. Il n'y avait pas vraiment de citoyens ni de patients qui étaient intégrés dès le départ. Hein. C'est vraiment quand on est arrivé les voir qu'ils ont dit « Ah ouais, c'est une bonne idée !» Mais ils n'avaient pas du tout pensé de cette façon-là au départ. Et puis 34% des adultes et 68% des ados seraient intéressés à participer. Donc ça aussi, ça montre qu'il y a une appétence en plus chez les jeunes à être partie prenante dans le développement des technologies. La perception des répondants, donc la connaissance perçue sur l'application, il y avait 43% des adultes qui croient que leurs connaissances sont basses, donc ils n'ont pas beaucoup d'informations finalement sur à quoi ça sert vraiment ce genre de truc. L'application peut identifier des utilisateurs, donc là aussi il y avait des mauvaises perceptions qui ont beaucoup circulé dans la population. Donc vous voyez quand même que 45% et 42% pensaient qu'il y aurait vraiment une capacité de pouvoir identifier les personnes et aussi qu'on pourrait les géolocaliser. Donc ça allait à l'encontre quand même de la manière dont l'application avait été construite au départ. Et puis on a été aussi capable de pouvoir identifier des prédicteurs. Donc là c'est sûr que le degré de littératie numérique des personnes est très, très, très dépendante de leur capacité à pouvoir accepter une telle application. Donc, ça reprend aussi ce que nous a dit le présentateur avant moi, là, en disant qu'effectivement, c'est encore les personnes qui sont super éduquées, qui comprennent mieux un peu l'utilité de ce genre de choses. Mais il faut vraiment travailler à augmenter la littératie pour que les personnes puissent mieux comprendre les raisons pour lesquelles on va dans ce sens-là. Et puis, pour les ados, eh bien, ils étaient aussi les personnes qui étaient très préoccupées par la pandémie. Ben, c'était ceux qui étaient le plus susceptibles de télécharger l'application. Et ceux qui avaient l'impression d'avoir de bonnes connaissances aussi étaient plus enclins à l'utiliser. Donc, fort de tout ça, c'est certain que pour les pouvoirs publics, on retient quand même pas mal de beaux messages. Le premier, c'est que pourquoi avoir exclu la population au moment où la pandémie est arrivée ? J'aimerais quand même qu'on me réponde. C'est quand même assez incroyable. Il y a eu très peu d'initiatives finalement. Il y en a eu quand même, il ne faut quand même pas dire qu'il n'y en a pas eu, mais il y a eu quand même un comité, par exemple, sur l'élaboration du protocole de triage dans les soins intensifs, où là, il y a eu quand même des patients qui ont été impliqués et ce genre de choses. Mais d'une façon générale, on n'a vraiment quand même pas du tout responsabilisé la population. Or, elle aurait été tout à fait prête à le faire. Deux, vous voyez que la consultation peut se faire quand même relativement assez facilement et rapidement. Que les gens sont prêts à participer, donc pourquoi s'en priver? Puis en plus, au Québec, on a la chance d'avoir vraiment un réseau maintenant de patients partenaires dans toutes les régions du Québec, donc on peut facilement les mobiliser. Et puis on a des organismes tels que l'INM qui ont vraiment des réseaux partout au Québec qui peuvent vraiment aider aussi à cette consultation publique. Donc c'est vraiment dommage de s'en priver. Et finalement, c'est ça la leçon, c'est que si on se retrouve dans une situation comme celle-là, il serait vraiment important dès le départ que lorsque l'on va créer des nouvelles technologies qui font appel à l'intelligence artificielle, on se dote de comités à la fois citoyens et usagers qui nous permettent vraiment de constamment tester les idées, s'assurer qu'on ne passe pas à côté de données qui nous permettraient de pouvoir éviter qu'il y ait une acceptabilité sociale finalement relativement assez faible de ces technologies. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup Marie-Pascale. Donc maintenant, on va vous emmener dans le sud africain. So I'm switching in English because we will present the work of our next guest, Kristophina Shilongo. Let me open my computer. And also, I wanted to bring really completely different perspective, and this is why, I try not to, let's do, the global south part, and now let's focus on Canada. I want, to go to Canada and then to India, to Canada, and to South of Africa, because I want to understand, and also I want to see also that there is some trend between all of these citizen initiative, and there is some common trends. So this is why I wanted to mix them. So Kristophina Shilongo is an associate researcher at Research ICT Africa and senior tech policy fellow at Mozilla. Kristophina was formerly a digital media practitioner at the Central Bank of Namibia, being at the center of the financial sector, in Namibia, as well as a prior working experience in the private sector, has highlighted the need to critically examine the extent to which data is governed, shared, and used for public good, a cause. So also what we wanted to do with that workshop is to talk about the other way to do ethics, and why not focus on, and this is what Kristophina is going to talk about, this multi-perspective approach of ethics. Also, you will see that we will talk about a more relational ethics, so this is the kind of perspective we want to explore today. So now the floor is for Kristophina. Kristophina has already recorded her speech, as presentation, but as mentioned earlier, she will be online to take questions. So now the floor is to the presentation of Kristophina.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kristophina Shilongo. I go by Kito. I'm very excited to have or to be part of this conversation today. I am currently a senior tech policy fellow at the Mozilla Foundation, where my project is looking at participatory practices within the conservation sector. And I intend to use those findings to advance trustworthy AI within Southern Africa. Over the past couple of years, I've also worked on various AI as well as data justice projects within the African context. And so this topic of decolonizing AI and AI ethics is very closely related to the kind of work that I do. So my presentation to you today will be about embracing a multi-perspective approach to AI ethics. I will begin by presenting a case for why a multi-perspective approach, and thereafter I will delve into how this will be helpful in allowing us to question AI and the existing AI principles or AI ethical principles. I'd also like to share with you very briefly some ethical issues that have we've identified through a study in 7 African countries in Southern Africa. And lastly, I will be able to present to you how useful this multi-perspective perspective approach is in helping us develop AI ethical principles. Before I share with you why this multi-perspective approach, I just want to define what I mean by a multi-perspective approach. For me, it goes beyond the representation of multiple or diverse perspectives. Multiplicity of perspectives here speaks to incorporating multiple levels of understanding and analysis of the ethical issues that are posed by AI systems. And it asks us to consider how various historical and structural contexts influence how we view and how we define AI ethics. So for me, multiplicity in multiple perspectives recognizes and acknowledges the lived, multiple lived realities on an economic, social, political, or cultural dimension. So why a multi-perspective approach? I think the current dominant ethical frameworks, which are, the traditional consequentialist philosophies, they are informed by Western economics, social and political structures which privilege individualism. And so we see through these frameworks that ethical failures of these systems are sometimes blamed on the individual, and this normalizes exploitation of labor. It promotes an unjust system in which people who are historically marginalized and structurally marginalized, that is normal. Injustice that they face are normalized under that system, and this is in conflict to the values of other communities where, yes, ethical issues are around promoting privacy or protecting privacy, promoting human agency and autonomy, but it extends beyond meeting those needs of human beings, and also asks, how does meeting the needs of human beings impact the environment and other living ecosystems? So this multi-perspective approach helps us to think about the power asymmetries behind the values that we prioritize. And the second reason is that, quite obvious, but sometimes not, that AI technologies may be developed by a minority in the US, in North America, and in China, but they are used and impact communities around the world. So they have AI technologies have a global impact, and therefore we need multi-perspectives. And even within AI ethics itself, we cannot deny the presence of a policy hegemony. We've seen that, AI principles, which, talk about privacy, agency, and all those values that we speak of, we've seen come from North America, they come from Europe, and they infiltrate or impact how other the principles that are adopted by other communities, for instance. The last is we need a multiple perspective because of the limited empirical evidence that we have of the harm caused by AI technologies. There's a huge, we've seen stories, or we've seen, the exploitation of labor in China, for instance, the issues of facial recognition and surveillance. However, like the violations, so human rights violations, and are endless, so to say, and we cannot wait for empirical certainty to believe that the harms that can arise from these AI systems. And within, outside of the global powers, outside of North America, outside of Europe, outside of these dominant nations, so to say, quote unquote, very little consideration is made for marginalized communities in places such as Africa and Asia. So there is no consideration of the ethical issues that arise from structures such as sexism, ableism, rural-urban divides, and classism. And so this multi-perspective approach allows us to question AI ethics or AI technologies in a manner that cannot be accommodated by the traditional consequentialist AI or ethical philosophies. And we've seen experts, AI ethics experts, and we've seen decolonial experts come together, and they've suggested other sort of philosophies that are more communal, that adapt a different definition to personhood that is not individualistic and that is more relational. I'll not delve into that, but I'm sure many of you have read this incredible paper by Sabelo Mplambi, who speaks of or distincts between rationality and relational personhood. And in it, he presents the Ubuntu philosophy, African philosophy, as a alternative or another ethical framework. And in it, basically, Ubuntu is a person. It's viewed as a person is a person to other persons. And I love this quote by Sabelo, which from that same paper, which is the celebration of a hero or institution in Ubuntu is a celebration of the ideals held by the society, the social ethic, rather than a celebration of a particular individual or institution. And I could insert that it's not a celebration of an advancement in AI technology or revolutionary technology. And so Ubuntu, which is popular in Southern Africa, and Ujama, or its counterpart Ujama in East Africa, or the Ifa divinations, which are all very similar, have a dialectic approach which can be applied to AI ethics. These frameworks allow us to perceive both the negative, but also the positive uses, as well as the effects of AI to different humans and human groups. So it doesn't assume that we all have the same values, and it doesn't take this individualistic approach. It very much considers the human group, so to say. And viewing AI and these African or these relational outlooks on personhood and communal philosophies allow us to view AI as a contested ecosystem that can be reconstructed to serve different human needs and goals, and this is of course with or without evidence. It allows us to ask, which humans are at risk of ethical violations, which humans are we protecting, which humans are inflicting pain on other humans, who is human and who is not. And who is human also talks to, the kind, it is not only, who can use the technologies, but who is being used, whose labor is being alienated to advance these technologies, and therefore who is human and who is not. And it extends as well to the benefits. It's often cited that AI has all these benefits, but what are the benefits? Some societies privilege economic benefits over social benefits, and other societies, they privilege environmental preservation. They privilege social and cultural benefits over the economics. And so what are the benefits that are arising from these technologies, and how are they distributed? In the case of GPT in Kenya, workers were paid between $1 and $2 US, and the potential of that technology is worth billions of US dollars. So how are these benefits distributed? Is that ethical or is it not ethical? And again, how do we define harm and how do we define value? We need to ask those questions and come up with frameworks, ethical frameworks that respond to those principles or to those questions. And for me, really, a multi-perspective approach is I would like to think of, what we need is a multi-perspective approach and not alternative perspectives, because saying alternative assumes the existence of a center that is not, that is in North America, a center that is in Europe, a center that is in China. And and I think multi-perspective also goes back to that, what I said about multiple lived realities. So there are multiple centers. Now, I just want to share very briefly some findings from a study that we conducted in 7 African countries within Southern Africa. We found about 100 use cases, so companies and projects, governments who are using AI systems in one way or the other. And we found about over 100, but we only sampled about 45. And we can see the majority of them were in the private sector, but some of them were also used in the public sector. On a policy side, on the policy side of things, just very briefly, we did a landscape study of the foundational laws for which can advance responsible AI and ethical AI, if you may. Most of the countries have those foundational laws. Of course, some of them need upgrading to include AI technologies, but the gap really is in the absence of national AI strategies, with only South Africa, with South Africa being the only country that has a national AI strategy. So there's so many opportunities there to formulate AI strategies that are informed by very communal or alternative AI ethics principles. And so just very briefly, I want to share some of the ethical issues that we came across from this study. One of them is linked to proportionality and do no harm, which really asks, are the benefits of the technology, are the benefits of AI serving the legitimate public interest, and do they significantly outweigh any potential harms that may arise? One case that we found was in Cape Town, where Amazon is building its headquarters on indigenous land, and it's really a question of weighing the economic benefits of job creation versus these communities wanting to protect this First Nation people of South Africa, trying to protect the very sacred indigenous land. So those kind of contentions, is that an ethical violation? I mean, for some people, it is clearly an ethical violation, but these are the kinds of issues or ethical challenges that we need to highlight. Another is on the fairness and non-discrimination. About 30% of the case studies that we sampled were not developed within the region in Southern Africa. They came from foreign countries. And in that case, we have, very clearly, there was no evidence. We couldn't find any evidence of these companies directly trying to combat discrimination from their data sets. An example is a lot of them, or some of them, were recruitment tools where they analyzed, the CVs and the credentials of candidates and matched them to recruiters. And in that, how did they train? What kind of keywords did they use to train these AI systems? So there are potential risks of discrimination within that. A very important one, I think, is that when there was very limited evidence that exists about the current practices to ensure human oversight and determination in the use of AI or algorithmic decision-making. A very interesting case study that we came across was some AI technologies that were being used to provide humanitarian response in terms of natural disasters. Those did not list they were not very concerned about the error rate of the result of the analysis. And that is a very important aspect of it. Like, what is the error? If it's 50%, I don't think anyone should be able to trust, this feedback from the system. And so those kinds of considerations should be made. And there was very limited evidence or someone explaining that this, this analysis has someone behind it who's able to, collaborate confirm the results. And there were also issues of course, transparency, that was mentioned, and explainability. There's limited public information explaining how these algorithms work, the proprietary rights, undermining potential transparency. And these are really arising, we think, from this very deterministic approach to AI, which is that, any advancements in AI are good advancements, are positive. Another one, and just the last one that I will share, is the issue of sustainability. It's a global issue, but also specifically, we wanted to highlight this because about 40% of the case studies that we saw were in the environmental sector, but there was very little research about the impact of those technologies that are trying to preserve the impact of those technologies on the environment or on the social life of those who are around or impacted by these technologies. Lastly, so how useful is this multi-perspective approach in framing AI ethics principles? I think on a policy level, we're able to approach geopolitical policy conundrums in a way that does not disadvantage economically or politically marginalized nations or vulnerable groups within, nations in North America or Europe or anywhere else where people are more privileged. And it allows us to design policies which challenge the center. So we, at the forefront, when we're talking about ethical issues, we do not assume that it's only going to be relevant to these kind of people. It's only going to be relevant to this very privileged groups of people. It is, and in that way, it is more proactive rather than reactive in waiting only for evidence, but considering all kinds of marginalized identities or vulnerable identities. On the front of regulation and governance, I think having this multi-perspective approach to AI and AI ethics really allows big tech companies accountable to designing redress mechanisms for minoritized identities and communities with historical and structural injustices in mind. And I think in the process of us designing AI ethics principles and AI policies, multi-perspective is a very clear reminder of having constant consultations and benchmarking exercises with a diverse group of stakeholders, and it will allow us to adapt or allow various stakeholders to adapt multidisciplinary but also multi-stakeholder approaches to develop national, regional, and international digital fourth industrial revolution, as well as AI policy initiatives. And I think it also calls for, policymakers and stakeholders that are from the global minority, which form part of a very powerful global minority in the so-called West, to align their AI policies and AI ethical principles with those policies that are emanating from outside of those regions. We have the African Union Data Policy Framework, which has a very strong data justice component, which I think is very important in recognizing those historical but also structural inequities that should be considered when we are thinking about AI ethics. There's also the UNESCO recommendations on ethics, which was developed by a very strong group of experts who are not only from the West, but who are based in Africa and in Asia. And on partnerships and frameworks and capacity building, I think this multi-perspective approach also boils down to big tech companies taking the responsibility and considering opportunities for attracting and retraining diverse AI skills when they are building or developing these AI technologies. And that is not only in terms of like the technical skills, but also in those supporting fields like data labeling and annotation, in various testing and at any stage of the life cycle of the AI systems, but also supporting, and in terms of what other stakeholders can do, supporting the development of AI technical skills of people who are part of the disadvantaged global minority that will allow a perspective or a different perspective in how those technologies are built. And with that, I conclude my presentation. The study that we have conducted on AI use and the AI policies in Southern Africa will be available in the next coming few weeks. I'm happy to share it with the team. And if you can follow the African Observatory on Responsible AI and AI to keep up to date with that report. I hope this was insightful, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Kito, for your presentation. Very interesting. So keep your question for the question period. And now I give the floor to my next presenters, Thierry Lindor. Thierry, I'm going to introduce you in French, if you don't mind. Ok. Thierry Lindor est un entrepreneur primé, un délégué canadien au G20 YEA et à l'ONU. En 2019, il a remporté le prix Black Tech Matters Innovative Entrepreneur of the Year à Washington. Et au début de la pandémie, il a lancé la plateforme appelée Colors of COVID, qui collecte des données basées sur la race et les résultats qui ont été depuis publiés dans l'une des meilleures revues scientifiques européennes. En 2022, Thierry a été nommé major de promotion du prestigieux Next AI et HEC Accelerator, tandis que son entreprise a remporté le prix Top Startup 2022 de BMO et le prix DMZ Amex. Donc bravo pour ces accomplissements, puis je te passe la parole.
Donc bonjour, mon nom c'est Thierry Lindor, je suis montréalais, humain, canadien, québécois. Je suis né à Hochelaga-Maisonneuve, d'une maman parisienne, d'un papa haïtien, ça fait de moi un Marocain. Donc en attendant, maintenant que tout le monde a ri, on va commencer. I'm going to be speaking in English, just to be respectful of the other people that participated in the presentation, notably the young woman that was with us earlier from Africa as well as from India, I believe. So we started Colors of COVID right before the pandemic for the simple reason that we felt we were being gaslit by the government of Quebec. The government of Quebec committed to collecting race-based data in June at the beginning of the pandemic. And then, lo and behold, months were passing by and nothing was being done. And myself and my co-founders noticed that the pandemic was starting to look more like a socio-economic pandemic that was masquerading as a health pandemic. And don't get me wrong, the deaths were real, but the disproportionate way that communities that we marginalize were affected were really, really drastic. And then we went back to look at some data, and we saw that during the H1N1 pandemic, in Toronto, there was actually race-based data that was collected, and Black men were 9 times more likely to die or contract the virus itself. So we started with the premise that human experiences are anecdotes, and if you've ever worked with government from a grassroots perspective, I can't speak as a scholar or a scientist or a researcher, but whenever you go to the government and you try to explain them something, they'll say, yeah, well, that's just anecdotal. That's just your experience. And then we made the argument that anecdotes are human experiences, and human experiences can be and should be converted into data. And data could be converted into knowledge. I think we could all agree to that. And knowledge during a pandemic can save lives. And then it would corner politicians and corner elected officials, but they still wouldn't help us do this project. So we decided to fund it ourselves and bootstrap it. Why? Because I'm an active citizen and an entrepreneur, and bootstrapping is what you do when you have melanin in your skin and you have a vision, right? And innovation, we believe, comes from problem. Not problem observers, problem livers, problem solvers. People that are living the problem. Chances are that fire was not invented by somebody that saw someone that was cold. It was invented by somebody that was really damn cold, right? So we decided to do something about it. And by we, I really mean these amazing queens that you see on this beautiful panel of people. Forget the guy in the middle, but you have Tiffany Callender, who's a social innovator, has been working exclusively with the Black community in Côte-des-Neiges for over 15 years, right? From running day camps to strengthen families program and helping Black and brown families stay together, right? She later on became the CEO of FACE, all the way to Dr. Alicia Boatwain-Kite, because we really wanted to have a project for us, by us. We believe at the core of what of the project that women have the solution for women. Indigenous people have the solution for Indigenous people. Francophones in Quebec had the solution for Francophones in Quebec during La Révolution Tranquille, right? So on and on and on, we came up with the fact that Black people had the solution for Black people. So Colors COVID was born. Why was it needed? Because we started to see in the United States specifically, where they do collect race-based data, that Black folks were disproportionately affected. I myself lost cousins and family right at the beginning of the pandemic. So I was really, really gung-ho on doing something about it. I did not just want to be a standby observer of this situation. And this is how we decided to engage the problem. I'll start by saying this, because I see a lot of researchers and people that are passionate about tech and AI. There's something magical that happens when you sprinkle trust into your process. I'll repeat that. There's something magical that happens when you sprinkle trust into a process. And by trust, I mean trust from the people that you claim to want to help. The big problem I find with researchers and government officials is we think that Black and brown people are actually objects of the struggles they go through, the poverty, the socioeconomic oppression they live, when in reality they're the subject of it, all right? So we started with the what, right? Racial justice, anti-Black racism, intersectionality, social justice. The how was going to be through research, objectives, method, analysis, dissemination, and the what in the end were concrete actions that we were going to demand, social change. The methodology was fairly simple because we had the trust of the people. We did not come out there and start to tell them, and by them I mean us, my community, that we were going to solve their problems and they did not know better. We actually spent time with them and asked them, how do you see this project called The Colors of COVID envisioned and moving forward? And then a lot of people from the Black community was like, wait, are you saying that the COVID-19 is targeting Black folks? We're saying no, because government officials would ask us the same question. But you know what COVID did recognize? Poverty. Poverty in Canada is often Black and brown. It is often women. It is often marginalized communities. So we started with collecting race-based data on demographics, then in relation to COVID-19 through surveys, so it was quantitative and it was also qualitative, conducting key information interviews with the Black community and organizers, leaders, people that had been grassrooting these social innovative projects with no funding, right? We know now because we have the data, and we just saw recently an amazing announcement of $200 million, a Black Endowment Fund, that Black nonprofits and grassroots organizations in Canada receive 2 cents, not 20 cents, not $2, 2 cents for every $100 of donation. So it's from the Fondation Chagnon to the Desjardins of this world to all of the big, nice nonprofits that are helping grassroots communities. Black nonprofits receive 2 cents for every $100 spent in a nonprofit. So that is how you perpetuate systemic oppression, and you tell people to lift themselves up by their bootstraps, where they're like, what do you mean? What bootstraps? I don't even have shoes, right? So conducted, and then lastly, we disseminated and we started the engagement process. So what was the strategy in development? Use the research finding to inform and understand what contributes to the problem at hand, right? The arena, use the research finding to support development and communication plans, because these were really important in order to keep the trust, not just gain it. We had it, right? But we wanted to keep the trust throughout the process. And the tactics was to use the recommendation informed by the research to develop actions and interventions to address issues and mobilize knowledge. And you're going to see at the end the results. The results were pretty impressive based on what the feedback that we received from Santé Canada, as well as a lot of epidemiologists at the federal level that were like, how are you guys doing this with no funding? So this was our community accountability framework. And Dr. Alicia Botswenkai is amazing to me because she developed most of these frameworks. So first and foremost, we wanted to address the community, right, in a smart way. And then following this, commit to ongoing development. Ongoing is the key word here, not just one-time thing, not just, our vision with Colors of COVID was to call it Colors of Canada, post-COVID-19 pandemic, where we would force Canada to take a hard look at itself when it comes to data collection, but more importantly, technology, artificial intelligence, and data that would inform policy and governance. Afterwards, we wanted to provide safety and support to the community members who are violently targeted that respects their self-determination. How do we make them self-determined? And this is a framework that I believe could work for anybody that feels invisibilized in a society that he walks or she walks or they walk, feeling like ghosts at times. And last but not least, create and affirm values and practices that resist oppression and encourage safety, support, and accountability. The platform itself was mobile and responsive, and that's actually a real-life look at the platform itself and who was involved. We had youth-led organization, national organization, program, service delivery, Black, Indigenous, Jewish, Sikh, Muslim, LGBTQ2+, gender-based violence, homelessness, and organizations that serve the marginalized once again. Private sector tried to get involved, but then their objective was different than ours, let's just say. Health sectors, local municipal law enforcement, and then eventually most of the government got in. But they got in once we started to gain media attention. And that's what we kept hearing. Dr. Arruda going in the news on August 3rd and saying, we have consulted the Black community specifically, and we will not collect race-based data because it is too sensitive. And we asked them, sensitive to who? Who are these people that you came to have spoken? And then you have a nice little meme that I think illustrates really well what we went through. We noticed that COVID fatalities have underlying conditions. Of course they do. Of course they do. So here are the results, some of the results, not all of them, that we collected. Do you have family members or loved ones that tested positive for COVID? We saw that it was a slight discrepancy between white and Black folks. Very important that the others are really people of color, mainly. People that did not identify as white, essentially. That would be, if you combine both, evidently, then you go into the BIPOC, but we wanted to really focus on the Black community because this was the genesis of the project itself. Do you have a family member or loved ones that has passed away? We could see here that it's roughly twice as high in the Black community in regards to other communities. Have you experienced discrimination during COVID-19? We saw here that Black and brown people were experiencing disproportionate discrimination during COVID-19. Have you or anyone you love experienced over-policing during COVID-19, which is not a subject that was talked a lot about, unfortunately, which contributes to negatively impacting your mental health, evidently, especially in an exacerbated condition such as a historical COVID-19 pandemic. So between July 2020 and November 2020, we bootstrapped this project and we got 724 people to participate. And what do you do and how do you reach Black and brown people when they are technology agnostic? How do you do that, right? How do you do that when they live in a tech desert? Because of systemic oppression. We started to leverage the food bank process. Everybody's got to eat. At least they got to try. So during the food bank collection, we came up with the innovative idea to ask the people that were delivering the food at their house or when they would come and pick up their food basket to participate in a quick survey. And it worked. Because guess what? When Black and brown people trust the leaders in their community with their children during summer camp, guess what? They'll answer a survey for 5-10 minutes when they come and pick up their food at a food bank, all right? So I think it's also about understanding the communities that we claim to serve, right? So 67% of the people self-identified as Black. Of this group, we also decided to look at the age disparity. Because how did we know that older people were dying of COVID? We collected the data. That's also an argument we gave to the government. How do you know where to allocate the billions of dollars you need to allocate to save the people that are vulnerable? At the beginning of the pandemic, it was older people. And then when we would say, well, how do you know? They would ask us, how do you know that Black and brown people are more impacted? And we're going to get to this afterwards because now we know the data spoke for itself beyond our survey. So now you have the age brackets 55 to 64. We did 65 to 79 and 80 plus. Younger Black, Montrealers reported more mental health impact. So as you could see, 18 to 30 years old, close to 70% of them said that their mental health was impacted. And we're going to get to why the 65 and over in the Black community were saying that their mental health was not affected. This is actually really, really interesting. Know someone that tested positive, had a family doctor. The family doctor one was really, really crucial. And was an essential worker, are able to work from home was a huge one. They were not, most of them. Lost access to community spaces during the pandemic. That was a hard one. Because that was, if you are part of a community of African descent, a lot of time the community is your life, right? In a space where you don't feel like you belong, in a country where you don't feel like you belong, even though you might have been born there, belonging is a natural instinct for all human beings. So community space was a really big one. Then we compared our data, the Quebec population and people of color, with federal government data. So experienced discrimination was about the same one. Over-policing, sadly enough, the government did not collect that data, but we did. Applied for federal relief. We saw that at the federal level, a lot more BIPOC communities were informed about this, which I believe has to do with language. That's my personal opinion. But from the Quebec province, unfortunately, they did not apply to federal relief funding as much. Black Montrealers experienced discrimination. Data, once again, a lot higher in the 30 to 44, 18 to 30, a lot lower, and then the older population, a lot less. 2 out of 10 age 55 plus reporting that their mental health was affected. But here's a key data point there that I think is important to mention. What we realized is older people in the Black community had never talked about mental health. like most, I think, Black and brown communities, this is not something you talk about. I, for one, have an uncle that used to be in the basement. Used to go to family gathering, and he was there. He never spoke. I brought him his food, and that was that. We don't talk about mental health, right? But when we ask them during the qualitative research sessions if they lost sleep, if they lost appetite, if they felt a higher sense of stress, they would all answer yes. So they not necessarily know how to talk about mental health or even claim and own the fact that their mental health was affected. But they had all the biological indicators of somebody's mental health being affected. So I thought that was really, really poignant and interesting data points that I wanted to share with you. And then no internet access, that was a classic one. How can you really follow what, Dr. Arruda or Frankie Legault says if you don't really, have access to the internet, let alone cable television, right? Lost access to community space, we spoke about this, and then mental health. And this is, I think, one of the most powerful piece of data. Big shout out to CBC for this one. Total confirmed case of COVID-19 per 100,000 people, and in the Black community. We clearly see here that once again, it would be easy to come to the conclusion that it sees color, but we know that that's not a fact. We know for a fact that we've been saying it as Black Canadians. We've been in Canada for over 400 years, but at times we don't feel like we are included socioeconomically, let alone Indigenous communities or people of color. Now, this was actually conducted by the CBC, and you could clearly see a correlation, might I add, also to the price per square foot. When we started to cross the data between not just Black and brown people and where they lived in Montreal, the cost per square foot per real estate was actually a big impact. And the last one here, one of the last slides until we get to the results, am I good on time, Karine? Oui? Merci beaucoup. I love this slide, and I've done it a lot of times, City of Brampton, Japan, a couple of people around the globe, Brazil as well. But this slide I think is super massively important. Can anybody name me on the left what neighborhood is being separated by this street? All right. TMR on the left. And on the right, you are looking at Park Extension. Actually, in the 1990s, my economy teacher, Monsieur Laferrière, il m'avait dit, Thierry, tu vas à Parkex à ton école. La réalité, c'est que Parkex, c'est un quartier de pauvres. Puis il m'avait dit, TMR, c'est là que les riches y vivent. Puis il dit, c'est pas moi qui ai décidé ça, c'est ce qui en est. And he wasn't lying, because in the 1990s, when I was in high school, you're looking at the richest neighborhood on the left side in Canada, richest postal code, which was TMR. And on the right side, you were looking at the poorest neighborhood in Canada. And if you look at this data, which once again, you see the median income, because you could go back between both. The COVID-19 cases, COVID-19 as a pandemic was a socioeconomic pandemic parading, in our humble opinion, at colors of COVID as a health pandemic. You saw the median size income correlating directly with how were you likely to be in contact with somebody that was affected by COVID. And on the left, you have beautiful round points, greenery, space to play outside, space to social distance yourself. And on the right side, you got a jungle of concrete and big buildings and small spaces and people that work to make sure you had food in your plate. People that helped you get across town by driving your buses, and so on and so forth. So, BIPOC emancipation through technology and data. We were blessed. I was born in Hochelaga Maisonneuve, became a man in Montreal North and Saint Michel, and I never thought that I would be published with my colleagues in anything scientific. Nothing at all. But it happened. Bristol University, shout out to them, ended up publishing Colors of COVID. We're proud to say that we didn't wait for the government to act, we decided to act. And more importantly, Colors of COVID drove also a movement that is economically anchored, where we told the government that SIBA was a great project to help entrepreneurs, pass through COVID. But then we asked them, so how many black and brown people benefited from SIBA? And then we heard crickets. And then we said, that's not right. Black and brown people pay taxes. Women pay 51% of the taxes. So the relief should be proportionate to the people that are at the table. We shouldn't stay on the menu, right? So a program called FACE, Black Entrepreneurship Program, was created to help entrepreneurs actually, black entrepreneurs more precisely, access funding post-pandemic. $330 million, we're proud to say that is all anchored into what we did at Colors of COVID. And then we created, myself and my partners, a platform leveraging AI, more importantly, NLP and language models such as everybody's talking about ChatGPT and so on and so forth. So we leveraged this to democratize access to funding and make sure black and brown people had access to funding. Because 97% of people that start businesses do not have access to funding. They actually maximize their credit card. There's only 3%, I see a couple people laughing, 3% of the people that access grant and government funding actually look like that meme that you're seeing on that screen. Convinced. They have the resources, they have the Deloittes, the EY, and all the big firms to access and cannibalize most of the funding. We create a platform that actually works like Tinder, right? Instead of matching you with potential stalkers, it matches you with potential dollars, mainly black and brown people. You create your profile, we match you, you apply and you qualify. Somebody like Nala, Eleni Hiob, beautiful, strong black woman from Ethiopia, born and raised in Canada, was able to quit her job, matched with $150,000 out of potential $2.3 million, was able to create jobs in her neighborhood, hire more black women, and when the least privileged people in our communities, Canadian communities, do good, Canada does good. And yeah, extra, BDC says we're 1.1 million entrepreneurs. We create a platform that matches entrepreneurs with dollars. We're leveraging AI to auto-populate requests to save you time on the process of applying for funding. And last but not least, really proud of this one, anticipatory texting tool, kind of like Grammarly, but instead of correcting for vocabulary mistakes, it corrects for grant writing mistakes and fatal flaws to make sure that even people that have no knowledge on how to apply for federal funding can leverage AI and technology to innovate and help us rebound as a Canadian society. Thank you so very much for your time.
So now I will open the floor to question, but first of all, I have a question for you and Kito too. Maybe a provocative question. We're talking about ethics, what kind of ethics should be put in place just to give space and power to people who will be represented to AI tools. Is self-determination something that should be at the core principle of this ethics? You talk about self-determination in your initiative, and also I know, Pascal, that maybe it will be more emancipation, I don't know, but and Kito also, you talk about representation and how we must take into account local context. So my question is self-determination the core principle of this, the new, not the new, but the ethic that we should put in place into the AI ecosystem? Want to start? Marie-Pascale, ok.
Il y a une jolie formule qui dit nothing about me without me. Je pense que c'est un peu ce qui nous relie tous les trois là, dans ce qu'on a présenté là, c'est que dès qu'on parle d'une population, on ne peut pas prendre des décisions pour elle, c'est juste pas possible. Et tu l'as, je pense, très 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 bien expliqué. Tu as même commencé comme ça en introduction. Et puis, moi, je l'ai fait à un niveau plus populationnel et un peu moins sur un exemple de population, mais on pourrait tout à fait travailler d'une façon plus microscopique sur chacune des populations pour réfléchir d'une façon plus individuelle sur une problématique comme celle de la Covid, par exemple, qui est une problématique qui touche une population at large. Mais après, effectivement, les impacts ne sont pas tout à fait les mêmes en fonction de là où on se situe dans une société. Et puis là, il faut être très, très, très vigilant par rapport à ça et pas prendre des décisions à la place des personnes qui sont directement concernées. Je pense que
Kito, do you want to say something or?
Hi, hi everyone. I think because of the global, the way that technologies are used globally, I think self-determination in terms of like different communities having different outcomes they want from technology should be something that they should have. And so I think, I don't know, when Thierry was talking about the issues of, people of Black and people of color in Canada, I understand where that comes from, but it's something that sometimes those issues may not apply to Black people or brown people within Africa. And so self-determination is very important. And in terms of social economics as well, people may find, often we always told about this, the economic benefits of technology, the economic benefits of data, but not everyone wants, that's not a value for everybody. Some people want their communities to advance socially. Some people want joy. And oftentimes, I think this is something also that we don't realize, that every time we push, or people from major institutions, always when they push about technology, they always push for this economic benefit of data, of technology, but not everyone wants, not everyone finds value in that. There's joy in technologies. There is so many things that could come from using AI, but it's always this socio-economic benefit that is sort of in a way imposed on people. So yeah, I think that's all I can say for now.
Thank you.
And if I could add to this, I think one of the things that we kept hearing at the beginning from our elected official, and I loved them, I used to tune in all the time, every day. I was like, okay, every day I'm getting an update on this. I kept hearing we're all in this together, we're all in the same boat, and that's not true. We're all in the same storm maybe, but we're definitely not in the same boat. I know people don't have boats at all. They're swimming. So you tell me I'm in the same boat. You're losing me right then and there. And if it's not about self-determination, then what's the goal? What are we really, really doing this for? Studies, researches, tech advancement, innovation. And I think also it's very dangerous, and we do this a lot. We associate technology and innovation systematically to economic growth, but one person's economic growth is another person's economic disparity, where it starts to widen the gap. And that's something we never talk about, unfortunately, because we associate innovation and tech with, we need it, right? AI, it's gonna help us do better, and Minister Fitzgibbon talks about it, and he's right. But then we have to be cognizant of the paradigms of the people that are going to be on the receiving end of this economic growth if it is not inclusive.
Okay, this leads me to my next question, because when I'm doing some conferences and talking about including people, who will be affected, and say how do we include them? So my question to you is, okay, how? Can you, because I've said that I will bring an answer at the end of this panel. No, that's not true. But how can we include the people primarily affected? How can we, and you give some example in your presentation, but regarding your experience and the context that you have been, you're doing your work, so what kind of condition you think we should put in place when we look, for example, at a state level, not international level, but national level, let's say that. Who want to start?
Moi, je peux commencer avec les groupes communautaires. Quand même, on a un tissu de groupes communautaires absolument exceptionnel au Québec, qui est quand même réparti aussi au niveau du territoire, et c'est vraiment important d'aller vers eux. Là, je pense que si on ne va pas vers eux, c'est sûr qu'on ne leur donne pas la parole. Donc, c'est un effort supplémentaire, là, comme je l'expliquais dans notre projet. Au départ, on avait quand même cette conscience comme quoi il fallait qu'on aille chercher des populations qui étaient plus fragilisées. Mais après, c'était effectivement comme ta question, en disant, et on fait comment ? Puis c'est là où on a commencé à regarder les différents types de groupes communautaires auxquels on avait accès. Puis c'était intéressant parce que leur première réaction, c'était de dire « mais ça ne nous concerne pas, parce que justement c'est de la technologie et on n'aime pas la technologie et on n'a rien à voir avec la technologie ». Puis on leur disait « mais si, au contraire, parce que justement la technologie est en train de créer des gros trous dans le, comment ça s'appelle, créer même de l'exclusion sociale encore plus, et donc on a encore plus besoin d'avoir vous autour de la table ». Mais c'était très intéressant de voir la première réaction qui était très négative, en disant on ne peut pas participer parce que c'est pas du tout de notre sort. Puis en insistant et en expliquant pourquoi on était intéressé à les rencontrer, ben là on a quand même créé un pont. Puis mais c'est un pont qu'il faut avoir créé avant, parce que là il a fallu le créer en situation de crise, et ce n'était pas du tout des bonnes situations pour pouvoir faire ça. On aurait eu un espace qui aurait déjà créé ce que tu as appelé évidemment la confiance dès le départ. Ben, ça aurait été beaucoup plus facile d'aller les voir, ils auraient beaucoup mieux compris. Là, il y avait beaucoup de suspicions quand on est allé les voir. Franchement, c'était évident, hein. Et c'était normal, en disant mais pourquoi ils veulent nous interpeller sur des problématiques qui nous touchent, mais en même temps on est exclus. Donc je trouvais ça, c'était une super belle leçon en tout cas qu'on a reçue sur notre projet. Non?
Maybe Kito, do you want to say something, or Thierry, maybe?
I can go. I think these are questions that we also have. And things that we've been thinking about. And for me, and I think what my work is trying to kind of like find answers to is how, first of all, can establish like a systems thinking approach to AI and the development of AI, but also like the governance. So in terms of like on a national level, or you know, intergovernmental level, at what point do we, can citizens, consumers of technology, people who might be affected by these technologies, participate in the formulation of those policies or ethical mechanisms or regulatory mechanisms? And I think another important part is, while governments or institutions, for instance, might have consultations with communities, it's often sort of people think that participation and feedback from users is only at a certain point where we should be having redress mechanisms. So or some sort of, you know, that someone can come and say, hey, this is not working for me, who do I go to? Or this is not working for this community. People who organize, communities who organize by themselves and say that we've collected data and we've seen the harm caused to us. You know, we go to this person, this regulator. I think that is having this system where people know where to go for redress and for someone to be held accountable, for instance, is a starting point.
Okay, and so do you mean that participation also has to be done with empowerment? Is it?
Yeah, knowing where, like in terms of like first of all, knowing how technology, not the technical side of things, is know that when someone is a certain something is affecting them and a decision is made by an algorithm or made by use of some sort of like data analysis, that they know it's happening, but also that when it's implemented, and it might work, you know, sometimes we have systems and they do work at some point and then they stop working. Where can citizens go to say that, hey, this is not working, or, you know, this is causing harm? I think having those measures is also very important, and not looking at participation of citizens as a one-step thing and a one-step only before the technology or the or whatever technology is introduced, when it's introduced, more like a continuous type of thing.
Thank you.
And I think also what's important, and I talked about this, but innovation comes from problem solving. And in entrepreneurship, at least, we always tell people, don't be obsessed with the solution, be obsessed with the problem. Mm-hmm. Because if you're obsessed with the solution, let's say fire, inventing fire, and I think I have the solution, well, maybe fire would have never been invented. But if I'm obsessed with the problem, which is I'm cold and I need to cook food, and then I'll come up with whatever solution needs to happen. And I think the problem lies, and back to trust, where government officials, like ministers and elected officials, in my opinion, do not innovate. They do not create concrete solutions. They often provide the necessary funding to people to innovate and provide solutions. So to your point, I think that when we have inclusive people that have inclusive mindsets that are willing to innovate with the people on the ground living the problem, the job of elected officials is to massively invest as much capital, public dollars, into these individuals, these nonprofits, these grassroots organizations, in order to innovate and come up with solutions. That would be the first thing. And the second thing, too, is also understand that it is not because somebody has been exploited and marginalized that he does not have the solutions for himself or for herself. That's kind of very condescending way. Like, my father's from Haiti. There's two types of NGOs in Haiti. There's the ones that invest in Haiti, and there's the one that divert funding from Haiti. That's on a macro level. On a micro level, there's two types of aid, right, in the communities that I come from. Montreal North, there's people that are diverting funds from Montreal North, and there's people that are investing funds in Montreal North. And if you think that we don't know who you are, we know who you are. We're not ludicrous about this. We're not dumb about this. So you want people's trust? Don't show up when there's a problem, a crisis, a tremblement de terre, COVID-19. They didn't ask for this in Montreal. No, they don't even have a bus pass to come downtown Montreal. How do they get, COVID imported in their communities? So they're very woke about this. They know what's going on. So you want to gain their trust, you want to collaborate with them, do it before problem arise. Trust them with part of the funding that you have as scholars and researchers. But you know what? Go less scholastic. Go more grassroots. That's my advice.
Thank you, Thierry. Je vais ouvrir les questions dans la salle. Excusez-nous, on ne voit pas très bien parce qu'on a quelques spots en plein visage, mais... merci. Est-ce qu'il y aurait des questions pour nos panélistes?
Bonjour. Merci pour vos présentations. C'était hyper intéressant. Ça aurait été bien aussi qu'Adi soit là pour pouvoir nous parler. So thank you all for your presentations. I really, really appreciate it. Really appreciate those insights into how we should be doing research too. I totally agree that we should be doing it on the ground and with the people who are concerned. I think that's the basis of ethics, actually. So I have a question, a specific, I would have like tons of questions. Marie-Pascale, par exemple, je trouve ça super que vous ayez fait ce sondage-là. En fait, je ne le savais pas, je ne l'avais pas vu passer. Et pourtant, ça rejoint toutes les questions que j'avais quand il y a eu ces discussions-là autour des applications de traçage, qu'on peut appeler autrement. Thierry, I have a question. I find that interesting. What you did was fabulous, but